Okay. All right. So this is going to be our second class in this discourse that we began last week. First of all, a good Yom Tov, everyone. Today is a big Chag. The Yom Tov of the victory of the soul and light over darkness. So today is a great day to bring forth to open up the pathways of the soul, open up the power of the neshama. If you think about it, there's because as mentioned, I know you were talking earlier that today, 98 years ago was the day of the liberation of the sixth Rebbe. And he was liberated when the entire Russian government stood against him. The Soviet Union is a very powerful government who was dead bent on extinguishing the flame of Judaism. But Judaism is godlyism, and godlyism is true. In truth, as much as Hashem allows for the unholy to block and to interfere, if we're ready to stand up for truth with all that we've gotten, all that we have, and with the deepest stubbornness, then we prevail. And that's all that it took. It took a person with absolute conviction that he's fighting for the truth, and he fought. And he beat a government empowered by millions of people, one person. And what's left of the old Soviet Union today? Nothing. And what's left of the previous Rebbe? In Russia, thousands of Jews today's days in Russia, besides the ones that came to Israel and besides the ones that came to the United States of America, thousands of Jewish children that get Jewish education in schools and grow up and get married and build Jewish homes and have Jewish families and study Torah and do mitzvot. It would have been the easiest thing to throw in the towel and say, I give up. How can I be one person against such a enormous monster? And they were ruthless, for them to take someone's life was nothing. To send someone off to Siberia and no one would ever hear from them again. This is the fight for holiness, the fight for godliness. So we're not the big Rebbe, the big tzaddik. We're small people. We can evoke within ourselves also that power. And when we're being blocked with whatever blockages we have, and we also have obstacles. Hashem created us all that we are going to encounter obstacles. But we don't have to bend and bulk in front of the obstacles. If we stand firm and strong, we prevail. If it's for holiness and godliness, we break through. So it's a day of victory today. It's an incredible day of victory. So this energy was infused into the day itself. So when the day comes, everyone can tap into this energy, and it's almost like you can charge your soul in the day. It's like you stick your soul into the charger, plugging in by becoming conscious of it. And super consciously, beyond what we can understand, we get very, very great strength and power to prevail over everything that's blocking from us from implementing what God wants us to implement in this world. Most of our obstacles today are not from the outside. Most of our obstacles today are from the inside, which are in many ways much harder than the obstacles on the outside. But we have to be stubborn and strong and recognize that we have it within us to break to break through anything that might be in our way. Because after all, we all come to this world, we live here for whatever time we have. And the bottom line after everything is, what's the ultimate question that is like that the only thing that really matters, to what degree did we see through God's plan, Hashem's? To what degree did we further God's interest in this world? And every single one of us has a role to play. To what degree did we fulfill that role? Because that's real, that's eternal, that's absolute. To that degree, our soul is one with the eternity of God. Everything else that we get distracted with is all temporary. It's yesterday's newspaper. No one cares. A week later, a month later, a year later, it's forgotten. It's gone. But Hashem's plan in this world, the goodness and the holiness and the mitzvot that every single one of us can transmit and reveal godliness in this world, and that no one else can do, because every person has a unique channel and a unique ability. That's real. So when we think about the fact that we have a day today that supercharges us, then the day becomes very precious. And the good part is it's not just today, it's today and tomorrow. There's 2 days. So we have a 48 period. So just in case we were asleep, the last 24 hours, like I was, I have another 24 hours. We can always wake up at the 13th day. It's the 12th and the 13th day. Okay, so this is a little Farbrengen, because we're supposed to really have a Farbrengen tonight. And so we have a class here every Thursday night, so we're going to continue with the class. And that's the idea of the class, is that we were learning last week, is also goes along the same theme, that inside the rock, there is water. Even if on the surface, a regular rock not, but the soul, which is called a rock, has water inside. The water obviously is the life-giving waters. Water is life. So the life-giving waters, that every single one of us has that water. Question is, what's the method of extracting that? So Moshe, we know, sinned because he hit the rock. And God told us last week's Torah portion. And God told Moshe to speak to the rock. So last week we asked the question that it seemed to be a little bit of a trick. Because 40 years earlier, Moshe is told 2 times by God to get water out of a rock. In the beginning of the 40 years, Moshe was told to get water out of the rock. And then Moshe brought the water out of the rock. And the Jews had water for 40 years. You didn't have to engage the rock only once in the beginning of the 40 years. And the water flowed. But then, since the merit that was really bringing the water from the rock was from Miriam, Moshe's sister, she had the spiritual quality to provide water. So even though she wasn't the one who brought the water, it was done through Moshe, but it was in her merit of his sister. When she passed away, the merit went away. There was no more water. So now it became again a dilemma. We were thirsty. We needed water. In a desert, you have a few million people in the desert. You need water. So God again tells Moshe to bring water from the rock. So last week we learned the first time when God said to Moshe, God told him to hit the rock. That was the first time. And he did it and everything was okay. 40 years later, God tells him to speak to the rock. But Moshe hit the rock. But we learned last week that God tricked him in a sense, because he told him to take the stick. If you want him to talk to the rock, why does he need a stick? At best, he needs a microphone. I don't know, you have to speak really loud for a rock to hear, right? But why a stick? How's a stick? If you need to whack the rock, then we understand. But if you're talking to a rock, what do you need a stick for? So we learned last week that even that was a deception. Moshe was good at following instructions. Just because God told him to take the stick didn't mean he was going to hit the rock. First, he spoke to the rock. But by mistake, he spoke to the wrong rock. And it didn't give water because it wasn't supposed to have. It wasn't the right rock. Then he turned around and got a stick. But it turned around back. This time he came and he actually faced the right rock. And had he spoken to it now, the water would have come. But instead he hit it because he thought to himself, last time it didn't work. So last time probably I had to hit it. So he thought maybe he misheard. So he has to hit again. So he took the rock and he hit. So it seems like Hashem is playing games with him. And in the end, it's like a terrible thing. Because of that, Moshe doesn't go into Israel and he's punished. And It feels like it's not really that, what's the real story here? So he's giving the inside commentary, the inside story. What is the meaning of the water? The water is so the Midrash says an interesting thing. The Midrash says that it is a parable to a young child that goes to school. So when children are very young, the teacher wants to get them to listen, but kids are kids. They're not interested. They're not interested in knowledge. They're not interested in study. They want to have a good time. So in order to get the kids to learn, sometimes the teacher has to employ harsh methods. Today's days, it's not accepted in the education field. The teachers should beat the child. It used to be. And the reason is, there's a deep reason for that. Because we're already close to Mashiach's times when you don't have to hit anything anymore. Everything is willing to go. Everybody wants to participate. Just have to speak to people the right way. But from the past history, there were times when things were really resistant. And you needed to get through to someone, you had to employ force. So the Medrash says a young child, when you need him to study, to learn, the teacher has to hit him. But once the child gets older, and he's already in high school, or already in post and seminary and in college, is it more advanced state of study? Okay, sometimes a student has a bad day. They want to learn. They have a bad day. So sometimes the teacher needs to be a little harsh, but you can talk. You don't have to hit. So the Midrash says that's the difference. The first time when he spoke to the rock, because it was in the beginning, the rock was still young. And that's why he needed to hit it. When the rock wasn't listening, it needed to be hit. He had to strike it. But 40 years later, it was already a maturity. Now it's enough to speak. And that's why in Hebrew, if you look in the Torah, you'll see there's a difference. The first time in Exodus, in Bishalach, when it tells the story, it says it calls the rock, it calls it a tzur. 40 years later, it doesn't call it a tzur, it calls it a selah. Same rock. Here it's called a tzur, and there it's called a selah. So the meaning is, why is the Torah using a different term? Because when the stone is hard and resistant, you have no choice. You have to, in order to get through to it, they give it a bang. But once, after the 40 years, it was already softer. So now you can talk to it. So obviously, it's strange because you're talking about a rock. What difference? What happens in 40 years? The 40 years now, what? So we understand that this is metaphoric. It's discussing the condition of the Jewish people. It wasn't just the condition of the rock. The rock, water represents wisdom. Water represents godliness, holiness, life-giving. And each and every one of us has holy water, godly water. We're a spring of life from God. Sometimes it's covered with a hardness. You don't get through to a person. People are stuck in their own ego. They're stuck in their own, whatever constriction they're in. So there is a time when you need to be a little harsh. But then there is a time when you can already speak with words. And you don't need to be harsh. And that was the sin of Moshe. Because at the end of the 40 years, when you can deliver the message softly, instead you're striking, that was considered the sin. So it wasn't, just not following instructions. It was the concept, the idea. The concept, the idea, how to deal with the people. And as we're going to learn over here in the discourse, Moshe brought the people down a lot. Because here's the thing. When the way a teacher or an influencer, a parent, or any type of person that you look up to, the way they look at you, that's the way you will perceive yourself. So Moshe, being the leader of the Jewish people, when he not downsized, or when he diminished the people by conveying to them that they don't listen unless you hit them, what obviously didn't hit them physically, but the concept of being very harsh and strong and forceful with them. So in that sense, he made them believe themselves that that's who they are. that they're non-compliant, they're non-listening, and the only thing that will get them to get into line and to fulfill their mission and their purpose is if they're beaten to it. So they themselves conceive themselves the way Moshe saw them. But they were already on a much higher level. Had Moshe given them that and spoken to the rock, they would have seen themselves that way as well. And they would have been on a much higher level because they had the capability to be in that level, where all they need is just a softer approach. All they need is a communication. Now, the Midrash says, now what does it mean, v'dibartem? What do you say to a rock? When you want a rock to give water, what do you say? Rock, give water? What do you say? How do you get a stone? How do you get a stone to give water? What do you say? What language does a stone understand? So the Midrash says you should have studied a chapter of Mishnah. Shana Olav Perek Echad. You should have studied a chapter of Mishnah on the rock. In other words, had you stood over the rock and conveyed to the rock and shared with it words of Torah, the rock would have opened up and shared its water. Shana Olav Perek Echad. That's what the Midrash says. You should have said a Perek Mishnayos, a Perek of Mishnah. And if Moshe said a Perek Mishnah, the water would have been flowing. So why are you hitting? Why are you hitting? So what does this all mean? That's what we're going to learn today. What does this all mean? So last week we learned an interesting thing. That in general, I'm just going to do a little review of what we learned last week. The souls are called a stone or a rock. The water, as we said earlier, is the godly potential that's within the soul. There is two stages in the soul: the immature soul and the mature soul. So when the Jewish people came out of Egypt, they were still in a state of immaturity. Even after they received the Torah, they were still in a state of immaturity. And at that time, they are called a hard rock. They're called a tzur. It was reflected in the fact that the rock that was with them, that gave them water, because the physical is a reflection of the spiritual. The fact that they were watching, because the way, everything in life is really a metaphor. God is showing us a movie around us, and he's teaching us all the time about ourselves. So when they're in the desert over there, and they don't have what to drink, and they have a rock that's giving water, it's really metaphoric, literally, for their own souls and for their own experience. So the external experience in their practical lives was like an external manifestation, you might say, of the internal story of what's happening in the inside. So the reason why the rock was hard was because they were hard. And the method in which to get out the water from the rock, as we discussed earlier, was to employ a force. He's going to explain what does that mean in our own lives when we're not ready yet. And we need to employ some kind of a forceful way to get the waters of our soul out. In the end of the 40 years, we're already soft stone. All we need to do is to speak to ourselves. What does that mean? Study Torah. So when we meet a Jew on the street, do you have to be harsh to awaken the Jewish soul? Do you need to be strong? Do you need to speak about some kind of a punishment? Or do you need to speak about Maybe you don't even have to say even words of inspiration. Maybe all you need to do is share a little Torah. And the water will start bubbling. The internal water that's there already is ready to come out. It just needs a little Torah. So at the end of the 40 years, the soul is in a state where it just needs words of Torah. It massages the soul, so to speak, and allows the fluids of the souls to come forth. And what's the fluid? Is this water. Now, what was in between? So we have the beginning. What happened? You just mature just because you become old? That's called aging. That doesn't mean maturing. So just 40 years of time is not really what made it happen. What made it happen was the desert, the experience of the desert. The Jews spending 40 years in the desert, that experience moved them from a hard rock to a softer rock. So what does that mean spiritually? What is that desert experience, which can move us from being a rock, a hard rock that needs some kind of a forceful. Let me already introduce so that it'll make more sense. There is a method employed. He's going to talk about it later in the Zohar. That when you're trying to awaken your spiritual energies, and it's not going. When you're trying to inspire yourself and it's not going. When you're studying and the words don't speak to you. When you're listening to a class and it's bouncing off. When you're praying and it feels like someone else is praying in the other side of the room. You're not there. It's just words. So it's not opening you up. So what do you do? So the Zohar gives a solution. It says that in the yeshiva in heaven, they once had this discussion. See, the Zohar had great rabbis that were able to fine-tune their radios and their spiritual televisions to the upstairs yeshiva, to the academies of Gan Eden, where the souls study. And one day there was a class, and the class was on this subject. What happens if you're feeling uninspired and you can't move? And no matter what, it's not like you're not learning. It's not you're not trying. You're trying, but it's not going. So the head of the Mesifta, the Rikiya, which is called the Mesifta, the head of the yeshiva, gave his thoughts. And he said, well, it's like when you try to make a campfire or a fire, or you're trying to get a fireplace going. And anybody that goes camping and tries to get wood burning, so the Zohar says a lot of times you take a big piece of wood and you try to get it to burn. It's not burning. And you're putting it on the fire. It's not catching on. So what do you do So either you look for the other pieces of wood, but if you have this wood, what do you need to do? What can you do? So if you have an axe, you have to splinter the big piece, the big log, and splinter it into smaller pieces. The reason it's not catching on because it's too thick and too dense, and its density and thickness is not allowing the fire to take hold. So but you splinter it into smaller pieces, then the fire can finally break in. And so, anybody that makes fire, that first you put small pieces and then you can put big logs. The big logs take much longer for them to catch on. But if you get a good fire with the small little starter wood, small little pieces, you get the fire going. And then for the long term, you want a big log, but that takes much longer for the fire to break in. So he said, just like the reason the log is not catching on is because it's too thick and too dense. So sometimes when we find we're not getting inspired, maybe it's because our egos became so thick. And that's because a person becomes too self-righteous. Your image of yourself is a little too overinflated of how good I am. I'm such a good person. I'm so wonderful. I'm so great now. and I'm doing so. I feel very, and a person starts becoming a little smug. So the Zohar says, you know what? Take an axe and break it a little bit. Means take a little bit more, do a little more introspection on your life. Think, I'm kind. Am I really so kind? Am I really, really kind? Am I only kind when I have extras? Am I giving for others? How about if I have a situation where, if I give to someone else, I'll stay a little hungry. Do I also give, or I'm only giving? I feel maybe I'm not as kind as I think I am. Maybe I'm not as giving as real. Maybe I think, So you start examining certain things which deflate the ego. And when the ego is, then you created cracks in yourself and the fire. And then try to study something. You'll see you have a broken heart. When the heart is a little broken, a little softer, the fire will go on. So it's not the most pleasant type of a exercise, because it involves taking a sledgehammer and banging in. Now, the good part is when God gives us the chance to do it to ourselves, because when we do it to ourselves, we don't hit too strong. If sometimes someone else has to do it for us and God orchestrates that can hurt. But when it's ourselves, at least we know we're holding it. We don't want to hit too hard. And we shouldn't hit too hard, because that's part of what we learned earlier. Hitting more than you need is not healthy. I was in shul this week, and I witnessed two people having a very important conversation. And it wasn't people who came to shul to talk. People who are serious people, I know them, both of them, and they're good people. And they were in shul, and in the shul that we both daven in the morning. There's a lot. It's not like a bet knesset where there's like one minyan and everybody, because there's so many minyans happening one after another. So this minyan is over, the next minyan starts. So a lot of people are. It's not the type of shul where everybody's silent and quiet, and there's a lot happening. Let's just say a lot is happening. So there was a minyan happening, and one guy who's praying and he's doing his prayer, and these two people were conversing on something actually very important. I knew the content of their conversation. It wasn't just talking about the news or about whatever. It was about a serious matter, and they had literally a minute conversation like amongst them. And the chazan was praying together with the people, and they weren't talking too loud at all. But this guy is, he has his own issues. But he was trying to pray, and suddenly, out of nowhere, he gave such a shh. It was like it was scary. It was like I watched it happen, and I was thinking, okay, these guys would be quiet the moment someone would have said to them, because there wasn't malicious talk at all, and it wasn't disrespectful. They needed to be hit. All they needed was, if he would have just gone like that, just like that, they would have said respectfully, oh yeah, you know what, it's disturbing you. But he hit them so hard, and they were cool about it, oh, sorry, kind of a thing. But I watched it after I learned this. So I had my so, the employing of force when you don't need it. Come on, so the guy, so, but the Zohar says that are times when we need to splinter the ego, and then after that, when we try studying and learning, you'll see your soul will go on fire, because it's just the smugness of self-importance that's not allowing the fire to go on. That's why Hasidim, who really prayed every day and they wanted to find a soft heart, they would do what's called a cheshbon hanefesh in the morning before they would pray. They would do a little introspection, 15 minutes, thinking about themselves, thinking about how lacking they are, how much of their life they're busy not doing what they're supposed to be doing, but busy just serving themselves and their own interest. And the truth is, the more sensitive you become, the more refined you become, the more fault you can find. That's just the way it works. Because the more sensitive you become, you start noticing the small little things that otherwise go undetected. So you can pat yourself on your back and think you're so perfect, But when you get a little more refined, and even other things which might be okay, now you realize that's really, really, really not okay. So what does that mean? That's called striking the rock. So you see that there is spiritually sometimes a necessity for a person to employ a banging, a hitting of the rock. In order to do what? In order to get your spiritual juices flowing, in order to get your water out, the water that's there, the God-living waters to come out. But then there is, if you're in a state that if you don't need that, then it's not a good idea to do that. Because why imply harshness? It's not necessary. Just like you don't do it with someone else, you don't have to do it with yourself. Instead, study Torah, and that will, even if you might think the Torah that you're studying is not inspiring, it doesn't have to be. The Torah is godly wisdom, and by ingesting godly wisdom, it enters into the soul, and it massages the soul, because the soul is a godly being, and when the soul hears words of Torah, it softens up, and it brings forth the higher. And that's the problem with Moshe when he hit the rock versus talking to the rock. So what I just told you now is a very superficial overview of what he's going to explain on a much deeper level of what's the water, what is the soul capable of, and what are these various different conditions. Now, one of the things which I have to add, which is also part of the discussion that we needed to we mentioned last week, again, just to fill in, to bring everybody up to speed. So last week we learned that there's a verse in Song of Songs that compares the soul. In Song of Songs, Hashem is talking to his bride, which is Israel. And Israel is talking back to God, and it's a love song. Really a very romantic depiction of the love between God and Israel. And one of the things that God says about his bride is he calls her the spring of gardens. And then he says, the words are Mayan Ganim. You are the spring of gardens. Be'er Mayim Chayim, the well of living waters. So God is seeing his bride and Israel as a water source. Water is life, and is a water source. What's the double language? A spring of gardens, a well of living waters. A spring in a garden is water that is available right away. It comes from the ground, but it flows up, it bubbles on the surface, and it waters a garden. A well, however, takes digging. You dig a well. And the purpose of digging the well is that the water that's deep beneath the ground, a spring might be a lot of times you go if you go hiking in the mountains, you see water bubbling up from the ground. It's a spring. So it's right on the surface, on the top. Delicious fresh water. And then, but a well means you got to dig it out. But when you dig a well, you can find really, really, really a water source of, again, called Mayim Chayim, living waters. Okay? So these two depictions he explained earlier in the discourse is the souls, when the souls are in heaven, they're called the spring of the garden. Because in heaven there is a Gan Eden. Gan Eden is the Garden of Eden, spiritual place, an oasis of spiritual delights. And the souls, not only do they enjoy Gan Eden, but they water the garden. Which means their presence in the garden increases the blessings of the garden. And like water makes a garden grow. But that's the soul when the soul is in heaven. When the soul comes down in a body, then it's no more a spring of a garden. Number one, it's not in the garden. It's in this world, which is a harsh place. Number two, the water dried up. Don't have the water so available. However, life itself and our journeys through life is a journey to seek out our waters, to dig out the waters that we have. And here you got to dig. Got to dig a lot of times through a lot of soil and rocks and roots, which can be negative character traits, can be all kinds of addictions and materialistic elements that can completely over bury a person. So the water source, the huge potential of the soul is not visible, is not tangible, it's hidden. So you got to dig it out. It takes much more work. And then it's a spring. Then it becomes a well of living waters. So we learned last week that the well is much higher than the spring. In other words, what a soul is capable when it's in a body, although it is compromised, or although the physical distractions are so many, there is continuously the distractions in the physical world are so numerous, but yet God felt it was worth it, knowing how much distraction we're going to have and knowing how difficult it's going to be for us, because in the end, we're going to produce something we couldn't produce when we were in heaven. And that's the spring of living waters. So it's only when the soul comes into the body, it becomes a well, a be'er mayim chayim. So there is a greater potential that can only come out when souls go down onto earth and live in earth. Okay? That's why we have to cherish the time we're on earth, because this is the time we can make ourselves as a well. Okay. What does this speak to? This speaks to the idea that although when we come into a physical body, we're incomparably less holy and less bright than when we were not burdened by a heavy physical body. When a soul is free to be in heaven, she radiates enormous godly light, because there's no distractions, there's no selfishness, there's no material body to drag us away from God and from holiness. So the soul is so much more magnificent in heaven, but yet she produces something so much deeper when she's in a body. Okay? So that's what this idea speaks to, this concept. Now there's another verse in Shir HaShirim that he brought, which parallels the same idea. It says, the girl says in the Song of Songs, she says, Shchora ani v'nava benot Yerushalayim. I am black and beautiful. That's where actually that comes from, that phrase, black and beautiful. Comes from Shir HaShirim. Shchora ani, I am black. V'nava, I am beautiful. Benos Yerushalayim, the daughters of Jerusalem. So he explained like this. Daughters of Jerusalem are the souls when they're in heaven. They're called the daughters of Yerushalayim. Why? Because the word Yerushalayim is made up of two words. Fear, yira means fear, yirat Hashem, fear. And shalayim comes from the word shalem. Shalem means complete. So when the souls are in heaven, they are complete in their fear of God. In other words, over there, they can see God's majestic greatness, and the souls are recipients of that fear. So they have constant state of love and of fear. But over here, we emphasize their fear. They stand in awe of God's greatness without a second distraction. And that's when they're called the daughters of Jerusalem. He explained earlier, to experience perfect fear, you can't even be a spiritual being. Because once you're a created being, you have already distorted consciousness. This, when we say the daughters of Jerusalem, means the soul, even before it was created to be a soul. The soul, when it's a spark of the Shekhinah, when it's a spark of God, and it looks out at the rest of God, so to speak. A spark is looking at the greater infinity of God. That's when it has perfect fear. Once the soul becomes a creation, even before it comes down in a body, she can't fear God the way God ought to be feared. She loses it. How much more so when you come down in a body, forget about it. You lose it all. And that's why the souls that are over here in the bodies say to the daughters of Jerusalem, that means the souls enclosed in bodies speak to their siblings in heaven and say, Benos Yerushalayim, daughters of Jerusalem, you're so beautiful, you're so heavenly, you're so godly, you're so spiritual, you're so pure, you're so holy. We are black. We're darkened. We're darkened by all the challenges of life, by all the mistakes we make, by all the sins that we do, by all the stuff. But v'nada, we are more beautiful, despite our blackness and despite our darkness. Why? So the next part of the discourse, and this is where we're holding, is going to discuss the advance of the soul coming into a body, coming into this world. What is to gain? What is the soul supposed to reach? What does it achieve? How does she become more beautiful than when she was in heaven? And we're going to see that's the idea. She brings out her water. That's the Be'er Mayim Chayim, the waters that come out. What is that? So he's going to explain like this. The souls in heaven are called, it's a new concept. Souls in heaven are called the daughters of God. Benot means daughters. They're called daughters of Hashem. When the soul comes in a body, the soul is no more a daughter, it becomes God's kala, gets married to God. So the relationship moves from being a daughter to being a wife, or being a bride. And in that itself, there's two stages. There's the first stage of marriage where the two are not yet living together. It's called the betrothal. In halacha, it's called erusin. Erusin means, it's like being engaged, but really, technically, you're married, but you're not yet living together. And then eventually, there's the state of complete union and complete marriage. So these are the three stages. The soul first in heaven is only a daughter. When it comes down over here through its work, through the darkness of this world, it becomes a wife. And she becomes engaged to God, and that's called kala, like chatan and kala. And then only after that does she become nisuyin, become completely married. That's going to be mainly in the days of the Mashiach. So this state of kala, the state of bride, the state of marriage to God, that's the state. Now to parallel things, because we have different concepts running parallel to each other. When we said earlier that there is a state called sur, or rock, which is hard, which the water is not, it's hard to get the water out, and you have to hit it. That state is really there only when the soul is still only a daughter, not yet moved to a state of being a wife. So in the beginning stages of a soul being in this world, or the beginning of a person's journey into a relationship with God, so that state is being a daughter, as he's going to explain. And then, although she has the potential to be a bride, that potential is very hidden. In order to extract it, you have to hit the rock. To bring out the love and the passion and the fervor and the yearning that the bride has to her groom. That would be the deeper love that a soul is capable of. That needs to be, in order to access that, we need a stick, which we explained earlier means to be a little bit sometimes harsh on the ego, to break it, to splinter it, in order to break through. But then there is a later stage where a person advances in their avoda, in their service, And then they become a selah. They become more of a reach to a higher level of connection. There's no more resistance like a hard rock. Then they're already a kala. All she needs to be is she used to be reminded that she's engaged. Sometimes she might get a little distracted. For that, you don't have to break anything. You don't have to hit anything. All you need is just a little stimulator. Because sometimes, you get a little distracted with something else. It's like a bride who's bride, ready to get married, and her groom is her everything in her life. But sometimes in the work that she's doing, she has a deadline to work on, a due date, finish work. And he's trying to reach her, and she got so busy. But she knows that this is not something that she really cares about. She needs to do it because it's part of her obligations and part of her career and whatever. But it's so secondary. But even secondary things sometimes take center of attention. Then she feels so terrible because she knows that when he wanted to talk to her, to converse with her, to speak to her, he was knocking on the door and she wasn't there. So, but all she needs is a little reminder. She doesn't need no whole therapy for this. You don't have to go into marriage therapy over here because she knows her love for him supersedes everything else. But it's just a distraction. So this talking is enough, and he's going to explain what that means. But at a time where she hasn't yet committed to getting married. Now, even when you're not married, we're all start off as the daughters of God. And then understand, what does it mean to be a daughter? Why are we called a daughter? What's the difference of the love of God? Now, a daughter loves her father. The relationship is very strong, but it's considered an external type of a relationship and compared to the relationship of a husband and a wife, of a marriage. It's a much deeper bond. Let's see inside. And with all of this, he's going to explain the difference between hitting the rock and talking to the rock. Okay, so again, there's a lot of ideas, but let's see if it's all going to come together. Well, yeah. Yeah. Our name, our relationship to God, it moves between these various forms of relationship. Let's see inside. What does daughter mean? Why she's called daughter? And what characterizes the relationship for a daughter? And let me and to be very brief, what the because you're asking, I'll say it out before, is that a parent, a daughter loves her father because her father substantiates her existence. He gave her life and he's her caretaker. He supported her, takes care of her, watches over her, and secures her. He's the platform for her existence. We can love God because God is the one who gives us life. We can love God because we realize that He is the substantiator of our existence. We can even grow in that and appreciate that He is the source of life. And as the source of life, the closer we get to Him, the greater and the higher and the more expansive and the more deep and the more rich our lives will be. But the primary center point in the relationship is that I love you because of what you do for me. That's the root of the relationship. A marriage is where there is a fusion. A fusion where she loves him because she has such a, it's almost, especially, okay, it's hard to always understand it in the relationship between a man and a woman and a husband and a wife, but with God, obviously, it's a million times more, but it does apply. In marriage, there is a certain sense where you want to get lost in the other person's world. I want to be yours. I want to be yours. I want to dissolve into you. By marriage, it says the two should get together. It says you should leave your father and your mother and cleave to your wife, and then obviously for the wife, for the husband, same idea. And they should become they should become one entity. So here it's not like, I appreciate you because you're making me me. I'm enamored by you. I want to be in. I want to melt into you. In God, it's a much deeper understanding. It's a much deeper type of a love. It's not like I love you only because of you give me life. It's an understanding and appreciation of the all-embracing infinity of God and His endlessness of it. And it's not, and it's a pull from the soul to want to attach itself to that boundless, infinite endlessness of God. And it's not because it's gonna give me something. I don't even want to be me. I want to be lost in Him. I want to be lost in the Ein Sof. That kind of love is a much deeper love of the soul. Now, we're going to see soon that souls in heaven, when they are in Gan Eden, they only love God like daughters love a father. Because as spiritual as they are, they're caught up in their own existence, in their own spiritual experiences. And they see God as a source of that spiritual experience. Only when we come into this physical world and we're in a body, because of the darkness and the concealment, it squeezes the soul. And certain truths of the soul, the deep inner core of the soul's essence comes out. The soul's essence wants God not because of what it's going to get from God, but because it's yearning for oneness with the Ein Sof. That's what it means to become a wife. That only happens when the soul is in a body. The question is, once we're in a body, how do we reach that love? That's where he's talking about whether the rock, whether the hitting of the rock But one thing is for sure, the souls in heaven can never get out of being a daughter. That's why in heaven they're called Benot Yerushalayim. They're the daughters. We don't call them over there a kala, a bride. That only happens down here. Let's read inside. Ulahavim pirish ve'inyan kala, and to understand the concept of a bride. Hine b'bchinas kala yesh kama madregas. In the concept of kala, there are many levels. We're holding in the middle of page Taf Nun Vav. On the beginning of the third paragraph, in the page Taf Nun Vav, I don't know, there's no numbers over here, just Hebrew letters. So we're holding over here, to understand the concept of a bride. It would be the second page in your booklet of copies. In the concept of a kala, of the bride, there's many levels. In the beginning it says, now he's going to borrow terms from the Torah portion that we are going to read in 2 weeks. Next week is going to be Parshat Pinchas, and the week after that is going to be Parshas Matot. In Parshas Matos, it talks about a girl that makes a vow, and how a husband and a father can annul a girl's vows until she's 12 years old for a father, and for a woman, when she's married, her husband can nullify her vow. If she made a promise, the husband can dissolve it for whatever reason that is, but that's the way it is. So the Torah speaks about 3 stages. The Torah says a girl that makes a vow when she's in her father's house, that's one stage of a girl. Bin areha beis aviha, in her youth in her father's house. She is still single, without a husband. Then comes the next stage, that v'im beis v'im haya tia leish, if she becomes to a man. Second stage. What that means is not that she got married completely and she's living in her husband's house. Why does that not mean that? Because the Torah then continues and says, "Ve'im beis isha nedara," and if she made a promise in her husband's house. From the fact that it says later she makes a promise when she's in her husband's house, it must be that earlier when it says if she is to a man, it means she's not yet in his house. She is to him, but she's not yet with him. So from there, the sages derive that this is talking about a middle stage. She's no more in her father's house, but she hasn't arrived yet in her husband's house. So she's somewhere in the middle. She's letting go of her father, and she's moving towards her husband, but she's not there yet. So halachically, what does this mean? It used to be in the times of past, not today. It used to be in the times of past that a man would want to get married to a woman. They would agree to marry. He would give her the ring. They would be in front of two witnesses. They would be married as a husband and a wife, but they didn't make the chuppah right away. The chuppah was made 12 months later, a year later. During that time, she would prepare, whatever, and she's considered a full-fledged married woman. If she wants to leave the guy, she needs a divorce. So she's fully married, but she's forbidden to live with her husband or have intimacy with him. She's totally forbidden. Why? Because she hasn't consummated the marriage under a chuppah. Then they would so in those days, they would make the chuppah a year later or a few months later. They would do it in two stages. That's the way it was for the early history of the Jewish people for about 1,500 years. From when the Torah was given, during the first temple, second temple era. In the time of the Talmud, and a little bit later, they decided to stop that. In today's days, we do these two parts of the marriage. We do them both at one shot under the chuppah. In other words, the ring is given when we're standing under the chuppah, so we do it together. And we do the chuppah, we do the sheva brachot, which means you say the 7 blessings. We do the full marriage together. And there were many reasons why the sages decided that this is not good for the state of the Jewish people. It's not good to have this middle stage. So we have the middle stage, but it lasts just for a few minutes. It's under the chuppah, he gives it the ring until, if you ever go to a chuppah, you see that they read the ketubah. The reason they read the marriage contract is to make a separation between these two stages. There's no mitzvah to read the ketubah. The ketubah is a contract between and her. It doesn't have to be read publicly. The reason we read it loud is to make a separation between these two stages of marriage. Stage number 1. So what used to take a year, we now do it in a 5-minute. We pass through the entire year in 5 minutes under the chuppah. And we go from stage 1 to stage 2. So the first stage of marriage is called V'im haya tia le'ish. She belongs to her husband, but she's not yet with him. And then the next stage of marriage is V'im beis isha nedara, if she makes a promise when she's in her husband's house. So what he's saying over here is that these physical stages exist in the soul's relationship with God as well. Because everything that we see in the physical, when we learn the Torah, we have to always realize the Torah has a body and the Torah has a soul. So we're used to usually reading only the halacha of things, only the body. But then when we tune in and we realize there's a deep story over here, a story of our own souls and our own gradual development in our connection to Hashem, how we go through these stages. So he explains like this. Here we go. Ksiv, in the beginning it says, in the youth of her father's house. And afterwards, she will be to a man. She becomes then betrothed. And then only afterwards, if in her father's house, if in her husband's house, when she's fully there, she made the promise. Then that's called nisuyin, full marriage. So now he's going to first explain in our connection to God, what does it mean to be his daughter? So daughter is not something that you have to achieve. Daughter is the natural state of the Jewish soul. The further stages are something that we work on. We work on becoming his bride. We work on developing a much deeper relationship with him. But the status quo where we all start, there is no soul that doesn't start off as a daughter. Now, as a daughter, meaning not only that God sees us as his daughter, but that we see God as our father. And that's the natural state of every soul. It's not an accomplishment if you feel that way. It should be the natural feeling of all of us. It's possible that because of a negative upbringing, or because of influences that are not so good, we become poisoned in some way and blocked, that we don't even realize that we have a natural desire to connect to our source. But as a daughter, as a soul, just being a soul, should naturally cleave and have this desire of, so let's see. Upirish ben Arel beis Avi derech is similar to what it says. He's finding another parallel to this idea, to this gradual ascent. In Psalms, it also says, same idea. There's in Psalm chapter, in Psalm in Tehillim, Perek Memhei, it says, Shimi bat uri'i, daughter, my daughter, listen and see. And then it says, Shichechi amech, forget your people, ubei savich, and your father's house. V'yisav hamelech yofyech, and the king will long for your beauty. So it's saying like this. First, we're addressing whoever this woman is. She's being addressed, she's being spoken to as a daughter. And what is she being told? Listen, my daughter, and open up your eyes. Listen and see. So hear and see. What should you hear and see? Godliness. Look around, find Hashem, connect. But then it says, that's good, but now comes the next stage. Shichechi amech, forget your people, ubei savich, and your father's house. Move to a place, like it says, like we said earlier, when God commands Adam, he says, therefore a man should leave his father's and mother's house and go get married. So spiritually, this means graduate beyond being a child with a parent. Move your relationship much higher. How to? When you will come to that state, which we'll see in a moment, what will happen then? The Yisaf HaMelech Yafyech, the king will desire your beauty, which means he will want you as a wife. He will want your connection on a much deeper level. So that parallels what we said before, Hu B'chenes Kala, that's the level of bride. From daughter to bride. Shapirish, but okay, Chulu. He doesn't speak about the third level over here, but he just shows us that that in Tehillim we also find that. So what does this mean? Shapirish Bas. So let's first understand the level of daughter. Shapirish Bas Ual Derech Bas Nadiv Bitoy Shal Avraham Shenikra Nadiv. In Psalms, in Song of Songs, it also refers to Israel as the daughter of the nobleman. Bas Nadiv, the daughter of the nobleman. So the sages say it means the daughter of Abraham. Abraham was called the nobleman. Why was he noble? Because he was very noble. Noble means he was very giving. The word Nadiv means to be Nedivut Halev. Nedivut Halev means to be giving. Avraham Avinu is the man of kindness. So God refers to Israel, all of Israel, as the daughters of the kind man. What's the deeper meaning of that? We are all beneficiaries of God's kindness. The truth is, it's not only we are beneficial. If you exist and if you're a created being, which everything in this world, so we're all enormously beneficiaries of God's kindness. But why is Israel called the daughter of God's kindness? Because Israel, the Jewish people, the Jewish soul, has a unique knack and a unique ability to see and to appreciate that God is the essence of all blessings, that everything flows from God. And as a result of that, to feel like a daughter. Meaning to say that everything really is created and sustained by Hashem. But because of the concealments and the blockages that God set up in this world, it's possible to take everything for granted and to feel that all of our blessings are our self-made or random or just by whatever, Mother Nature and fortune, good fortune, and lucked out that you happen to be a human being that can see and hear and smell and touch and feel, and your lungs are working and you can breathe and your brain is working and your nose and your eyes and your ears and you can walk and you can talk and you, thank God, have talents and abilities and you can make a living and you live in Los Angeles where the weather is nice as well too. I mean, if you start thinking about all the billions of things that you're lucked out in your life that God has been kind to us, you can find millions of things, but you have to recognize where it's coming from. So the Jewish soul is more sensitive. Is more sensitive to recognize the kindness. And as a result of that, to seek attachment to God. Like a daughter never wants to go far from her father. A daughter feels very close and comfortable and attached, and all the time, cleaves to be next to her father. So the power of the natural state of the neshama of the soul is to be a daughter. Is a daughter. Let's see it inside again. Shepirish bas hu al derech bas nodiv bite shel Avram shenekra nodiv. So what does that mean? Zeu inyan masha kosov. This is the idea of what it says. Okay, this is a little bit. You realize when we learn a discourse, I don't know if you notice, we're learning something that the Rebbe, we're learning. This is from the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek was the third Chabad Rebbe. The piece that we're learning. He's talking to Hasidim who studied Hasidus their entire life. So when he mentions this, he's referencing ideas that he's spoken about hundreds of times to Hasidim who learned thousands of discourses. So it's like he's carving out a. But when I'm saying this is because there's so many. Every line is a whole discourse. So that's why you're seeing the multi-layers. He's tying one thing together with the next thing together with the next. So it takes a lot to be able to focus on all of this and keep it all together. So he's now going to explain the soul being considered the daughter, and the daughter in the sense that just like the daughter is a beneficiary of her father's kindness, the soul is a beneficiary of God's kindness. And when we as people, as humans, especially as Jewish people, sense God as the source of our blessing, so that creates a love from us to Hashem. Now, and that is applies to the soul in heaven on a spectacular way, because there they really, really see how everything comes from God. And their love to God is very, 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 very powerful. As we spoke earlier, their fear of God is perfect, and their love to Hashem is very intense. But the point being, as we mentioned earlier, all of that love is because God is the source of their life, their experiences. And he's going to explain over here that there's a whole series of worlds. The souls are live in Gan Eden. Gan Eden is a Garden of Eden. But in the Garden of Eden, there's multiple of levels upon levels upon levels. Each one where the pleasure is greater than the next. And the soul journeys in heaven through the various different chambers of Gan Eden. And her admiration and her love for her father only increases because she knows that he is the one who owns the garden and fills the garden. Now, what's the garden? The garden in there means the pleasure that they get from godliness. The pleasure, it's an incredible delight, but it's the pleasure of the souls getting from godliness and appreciating it, that God is the source of their own pleasure. So there's a certain selfishness to it. It's, I want you because what are you giving to me? The deeper love we're going to get to is one where the soul starts seeing God not as God as the supporter of the worlds, but God for what God truly is, Ein Sof, infinite, the only reality. In that sense, the soul suddenly feels, I don't even want to be a creation. I don't even want to be an existence with definable boundaries in which I exist in my world and you support my world. I want to become part of your world. I want to lose myself in your reality. That's the bride. That kind of a love is not rational, because reason will never really justify that. Because reason always seeks to explain, the reason is always, what's logic? Logic dictates to improve yourself, to have more, to gain more, to grow more. I'm seeking truth. I'm seeking the truth that will enhance me more, that will grow me more, that will give me more. But to love in a way where it's not about yourself anymore, it's a complete surrender to something bigger than yourself. That's called madness. And that's why who do we say? On a relationship between a groom and a bride, a chassan and a kala, we will say they have fallen in love and they're madly in love with each other. The madly in love, the madness is where it doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't have to make sense. So now how can we love God with such a love? How can we love God not because of what he gives us, but because of who he is? Only the soul is capable of that, because the soul intrinsically has a spark of the Ein Sof hidden inside of it, that it's buried beneath the soul's existence. Beneath the soul's presence of existence is a spark of transcendent divinity that's part of the Ein Sof. So put it this way: why does the woman want to cleave to her husband and become part of him? Because when Adam and Eve, she was once part of him. What happened? God took Adam's rib, a bone, achad mitzalotav, one of his ribs, and he created Chava. So what he did was he took her from him. So and then the verse says, you will yearn for your husband. Why? Everything wants to go back to its source. So her wanting to go back into him is because she's been taken from him. But metaphorically, our souls are a spark of God. And then that sparks becomes a created entity. So if I love God only because he's supporting me, means that I'm still stuck in my created little shell, which means my perception of truth is my small little world, my time and space bound existence, and I can see you as a supporter of that, the enhancer of that, the enricher of that, and even if I can see you giving me more and more, and I'll grow more and more in my love, it's always based on not your truth, but how you influence me. And that's not a real love. A real love is when it goes past how you influence me. So that's that love of bride, which he's going to explain. But he takes a little while till he gets there. So now I just laid this out. So there's a verse where Hashem says to the Jewish people, when we went out of Egypt, Hashem says, Zacharti lach, I remember chesed nu'urayach, your kindness of your youth. Lechtech acharai. You followed behind me, bamidbar, in the desert. So let's listen closely to those words. Hashem says, oh, I remember the days, the love of your youth. You followed me behind me in the desert. So number one, we're talking about the youth. So the youth is before we become a bride. You're too young to be a bride. What does that mean? We said earlier, when the girl is still in her father's house, the verse refers to her, bina'areha, in her youth. It's a state of immaturity. Now, you still followed me like a daughter follows a father. Why does the daughter follow the father? Because she needs him to pay her bills. He's going to support her. He's going to take care of her. Whenever she needs something, she can turn to her dad, who will take care of her. So the verse says, you followed behind me. Why did you follow behind me? Because everything you loved about me, from me taking care of you. That was during the time in the desert. In the beginning of the relationship of Israel with God, it was a very conditional love. It was based on, and God says that's called my behind me. Why? Because the inside of a person is who they are for themselves. That's the face of a person. The back of a person is their externality. The external element of a person is their back. It's called the external. So when any given entity, any given being, if I love you for who you are, not for what I get from you, but for who you are, that means I'm loving your face. If I'm loving you because of what you provide for me, it means I'm loving your back. Psychologically, I'm not talking about physically. Physically, you love the person's face, but that's because of what it's giving you. To love someone with a true transcendental, deep, obviously marriage also goes through the immature state, because in marriage, usually when you meet someone, you first are thinking always why you like that person because of what they do for you. But in a real marriage, you reach a point when you're married to someone that you really start caring about that person just because of that person. And it stops being for what I'm going to get out of you. A good marriage should move to a place of utter selflessness in the relationship. Doesn't mean you don't get, doesn't mean you don't feel satisfied. You get a lot. But the real inner point of the love is not because you're supporting me. The love is loving the internal of the person, not the external. So in the desert, it says, Zacharti lo chesed nurayach. I remember the love of your youth. Lechtech acharai bamidbar. You followed behind me in the desert. But he's going to now, this seemingly simple idea that we're talking about, the Rebbe is going to explain it in complicated words, because he's going to explain it as it exists on all levels of the soul. But it's still only a daughter. Pirish, chesed nurayach, the youth of your youth, shebchenes zu, this level, hu adayin benureo beisavia. This is still called the youth in her father's house. V'zeu gam came bas nadiv bas Avram. What does that mean? Isha chesed. Ulahaven zed, to understand this, hine shoyresh Yisrael hu bchenas tevuna. The root of Israel is in the mystical level called tevuna. That means our souls are rooted in God. And we know, those who studied a little Kabbalah know there are 10 Sefirot. Amongst the 10 Sefirot, there is the attribute called Bina. Bina means Chachma is wisdom, Bina is understanding. And Bina has another name for it called Tevuna. So in Kabbalah, it explains that the higher part of Bina is called Bina, the lower part of Bina is called Tevuna. Now, Tevuna means like also understanding, similar to the word Bina. But the word Tevuna has the word inside of it, Ben and Bat. Because if you look at the word Tevuna, it starts with a Tav. That's the Tav from Bas, which means daughter. It has a Beis, so that's the Beis from the word Bas. So right in the beginning of Tevuna, you have Bas, but in the opposite order, Tav Beis. And then you have Vav, Nun, Hey. So Nun and the Bays from Tavuna. The Bays could be used for Bat and for Ben. It's the same Bays. The same Bet could be used for Bat and for Ben. So Tavuna includes the world Bat and Ben. So what does that mean? So mystically, that means we know that the Jewish people are called, the Jewish souls are called children of God, children, boys and girls. So Ben and Bat, but now we're focusing on Israel in terms of being the daughter for whatever reason. So the root of it is in the concept of Tavuna. So what's the relationship of being a child with the concept of Tavuna? Tavuna means understanding. So there's a certain comprehension that is at the root of this child-parent relationship. So what does that mean? Pirish Tavuna hu benu bas. Pirish ve'inyan Tavuna. What is the idea of Tavuna? Which is a level of godliness that we're naturally plugged into. In other words, this is not something that requires work on our part to reach this level. This should be stage one in our journey. This should be the state of the soul without work. Sadly, we live in times when, because of the restlessness and the fast pace of the world today, where things work because of all the technology and stuff like that with such speed and so much distraction, that we don't have the peaceful life that we used to live. Truth is, it wasn't also so peaceful. People were overwhelmed by other things. So I guess I don't know if this is exactly. Let's just say every generation has its challenges, but what he's describing over here to be kind of the starting point of every soul, of every person, is to be kind of in a natural state of gravitation, where the soul gravitates, it pulls towards Hashem and towards godliness. Sadly, we don't always find it to be our case in our lives. It's one thing that people work and search and finally find. To say that every person has this, a little hard. But that's because of a side reason. Essentially, this is the way it is. That the way the soul is programmed, the way God sets the soul into motion, the soul is a daughter of God. But what does Tavuna mean? There's a verse, again, as I told you, why I was telling you earlier that I was saying, oh my, I'm getting overwhelmed by this discourse, because literally from this part in the Maimer and forward, every line is, and to understand this, there's another verse that says, and in Eksiv, so it's layers upon layers. Although you could keep the thread. That's the challenge of it, to keep the thread going. So you see it says in the pasuk, there's a verse, it says, Ulitvunaso ein mispar. To his understanding, there is no number. Which is a very strange phrase. It seems to be really, really bad verbiage. It seems to be clumsy sentencing. Not a good sentence. What do you mean? To his understanding, there is no number. To his understanding, there's no measure, maybe better. Or his understanding, to know him is unfathomable. That makes sense. And there is such a verse, ulutfunasai, and to his wisdom. Ein cheker, there is no research that can reach and understand his infinite wisdom. That makes sense. What does numbers have to do with Tavunasai? To his Tavuna, to his understanding, ein mispar, there is no number. So what does that mean? And he asks the question, mispar, How can you speak of numbers, bitvuna, and understanding? The Hevel Meimar, he should have said, Ulitvunasai, and to his understanding, in cheker, you can't research it. It's so big. It's so endless. The Inyan who, and the idea is, no. There's something very deep over here. To his understanding, there is no number. What does that mean? Briefly, we live in our world, in this plane of existence, and we're beneficiaries, we're recipients of God's blessings in this world. We can either choose to ignore that it's coming from God, or we can acknowledge. And when we acknowledge, we want to live in Hashem's goodness. How are we going to make sure to receive more of God's goodness? We do what God wants us to do. So we cleave to Hashem, we learn Torah, we do mitzvot. So by doing that, we connect to God and we receive His goodness. And that shouldn't be the motivation why we're doing His will, but it could be a motivation. But we are beneficiaries of physical goodness that comes in the physical world. But above our world is another world where we're not privy to know it, but there are souls. Souls live in those worlds. There is Gan Eden, as we spoke earlier. There's the Garden of Eden, full of godly blessings, far more pleasurable than anything we can imagine. The experiences, the beauty of those worlds are incomprehensible. How beautiful Gan Eden is. A sunset in Gan Eden will put the most beautiful sunset in this world to shame. It's a world that we don't even understand its beauty, its exaltedness, its richness. It's right, fine. Those who live in those worlds appreciate God as the source of their blessing and of their experience. But is that it? No, there's another Gan Eden, which has its own inhabitants. And so there is layers upon layers upon layers upon layers, which means worlds upon worlds upon worlds upon worlds, and there is no number. Where God's goodness and kindness and blessings are flowing into the world, and there are those who have the tevuna, have the understanding. Obviously, down here, there's some there is ignorance. Up there is only enlightenment. But the point over here is the tevuna, the understanding of God's kindness, which therefore creates a desire to be in a relationship with Him, to be close to God. That is without a number. Why? Because there's no number of worlds. So it's higher and higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. And that's why we use the term litvunasai. But see, we have to not lose the point of the discourse. What he wants to say with that is, all those worlds, with all their love they have to God, they're only loving God's backside. They're not loving His face. Because they are loving Him because of the fountain that He placed in the garden. He's watering the garden. And the fruits that He's producing in the garden for them to eat. Whatever kind of eating that is, it can be the most spiritual ecstasy and bliss that we don't even begin to understand, but it's still a love that is because of what is being given to creation, what is being given to us. That's His backside. And therefore, this entire journey could all be lechtech acharai. So do we have to go to Gan Eden for that? No. A person can be in this world, in our physical world, and gain insight and understanding of deeper truths and deeper realities, and continuously expand their understanding of the godly blessing, and go higher and higher and higher and higher, and it's still only the back. Because again, it's based on the self. So let's read it over here. It says in the pasuk, Gadol Adonenu. He brings another verse. How many verses does we have? Every line he's starting with something else. It says another verse that it says, Gadol Adonenu, our master is great, v'rav koach, and he has abundant of power. is an enormous strength. So the sages derive from here, Shir Kaima Shal Yoitze Bereshis, Reish Lamed Vav Alafim Revavos Parsais. The measurement of the height of the creator of Bereshis, which means the former of the worlds, is 236,000 revavos, which would mean parsais. So let's try to figure out how much that is. 236 million parsa. Parsa is a distance. Obviously, this has some mystical meaning. But the idea that the sages were bringing forth was they're trying to depict the godly infusion that infuses creation. They're not talking about God himself, because they wouldn't be putting a size on God. But God as Yoitze Bereshis, as the former of creation, it's almost like they're saying, how big is he? And they're saying that, 236 alafim, and they derive it from the verse, V'rav koach. It says about God, he's abundant of strength. So the numeric value of the word Rav koach is 236. Then they added the million to it. So it's 236 million. Avol, but this is the size, so to speak, the energy flow, the infusion of God into what? Into Bereshis. What's Bereshis? Bereshis is this world. When we say this world, whether this means the physical universe, whether this means also some level of spiritual worlds that are behind this world, but this is this measure. Above that, we're saying, because the verse says, Gadol Adonenu v'rav koach, ulitvunasai ein mispar. That means his tevuna is more than this. In other words, this measure that we said, 236 million parsa, whatever that means, is the size of the Yotze Bereshis. Let's say the size of the power of the universe as a certain measure. It's an astronomical number. It's a crazy number. And whatever it means, size of it, the power, but beyond that, l'tvunasa ein mispar. So what does that mean? Because the sages tell us, tzadikim ein lehem menucha. The righteous don't have any rest. After they pass away from this world, the righteous don't have any rest. The souls, shenemar, as it says, yelchu mechayil el chayil. It says they go from strength to strength. V'hainu, what does that mean? Shem oilam tamid ba'aliyah achar aliyah. They are continuously elevated. Souls in heaven are continuously elevated, elevation after elevation. V'hinei, for behold, yesh Gan Eden elyon. There is a higher Gan Eden. There is an upper Gan Eden, a higher Garden of Eden. Gan Eden atachten, and there's a lower Garden of Eden. V'hinei bein Gan Eden elyon l'tachten, between the two Gan Edens, between the two Gardens of Eden, tzarech liyas tvila b'nahar dinar. There needs to be, in the Zohar, it describes that when souls pass away from this world, and after they go through the purification process, then they get to merit to go into a place of Gan Eden. When they go to the Garden of Eden, it's very, very pleasurable. But when God wants to elevate the soul from the lower garden to the higher garden, it says in the Zohar, there is a process that all the souls need a dip in a mikvah. Spiritual mikvah. But it says it's a mikvah of fire. What's the point of putting a soul into a mikvah of fire? The intensity of the experience of the mikvah of fire makes the soul forget everything that it had before. It wipes the hard drive clean. It's like you do a complete computer. What do they call it? A reformat. So the soul needs to get completely wiped out, its memory from what it had before, to go to the higher garden. And the question is, why would we wipe out the experience that the soul had in the lower garden? It would seem counterproductive. Because if Gan Eden is a place where you're, let's say, studying and you're learning information that is making you very happy. So you would think that whatever you studied is going to assist you and you're going to graduate from one level of study to the next level of study. Why would we require a forgetting in the middle? So he explains. When do we say that whatever you studied earlier is going to assist you in your next level of study? When do we say that happens? That is only when the next level is relative to the previous level. So when you have certain studies and you understand, and when you're going from teacher to teacher, from class to class, the studies you study in preschool are going to help you in elementary school. And the studies in elementary school are going to help you for middle school. And middle school is going to condition you for high school. And high school hopefully will condition you for higher level. Each one kind of like prepares the person for the next level of study. That's only if one level of study is kind of has some kind of a connection to what. But if one is going to study something that is completely outside of anything they've ever heard, anything close to what they've ever heard, so then old knowledge and old information, preconceived information, or even good information, if you're trying to understand completely brilliant new ideas based on old ways of thinking, the old ways can interfere. So then when it's a quantum leap from one level to the next level, if it's an absolute, then you need to forget what you had. And why is he talking about that? Because he wants to show how the levels of elevation that there are in the higher world, each experience is so beyond anything before that it requires a delete of everything you've had in order to move into the next level. That's how crazy greater it is, level after level. Okay? And that's the meaning. His understanding has no number. Because how many Garden of Edens are there? Which means how many levels of divine perception and pleasure that is perceived in these worlds. How many? We speak of two, but each one has multiple, lower and higher, lower and higher, lower and higher, lower and higher, lower and higher. And this goes on endlessly. And that's the meaning that his understanding has no number, because the worlds that are beneficiary, so to speak, from this wisdom, from this understanding, goes without a number. Okay, so let's read this first. In the Yesh Gan Eden, Elyon Gan Eden Tachten, there's the higher Gan Eden, there's the lower Gan Eden. Then Gan Eden, Elyon Tachten, Tzarich Lis Tefillah Ben Ahar Dinar. There needs to be a dip in that Ahar Dinar ki Ein Aroich Klal. There is no comparison at all between Asagar Shebe Gan Eden Tachten, between what we can comprehend in the lower Gan Eden, La'elyon to the higher Gan Eden. L'chein Tzarich Lis Tefillah. That's why there needs to be a dipping. Ben Ahar Dinar, in this river of Dinar, L'shkoach legamri, to completely forget al ma shehisig began Eden atachten, on that which was understood in the lower Gan Eden, al derech kamoy Reb Zera. Now he gives an example on that. The Talmud says there was a great sage, his name was Reb Zera, and he was a great scholar of the Talmud. He studied in the yeshiva in Babylonia. Okay? And then at one time of his life, he was moving and he was going to go to study in Israel. He was going to go to the yeshiva in Israel. So it says that he fasted 100 fasts. He took upon himself, he fasted and fasted and fasted. And the fasting was a means of prayer. 100 fast days. What was the purpose? What was the intention? That he should forget everything he studied in Babylonia. He should come with an empty, clear head. Shetzam meya tanisa, 100 fasts. Ki echad alishkach kol Talmud Bavli. He wanted to forget the entire Babylonian Talmud. Why? Ki be'eretz Yisrael, because the level of study that was in Israel was so much deeper and so much more advanced than what they studied in the Academy of Babylonia. Ki hoya mevalvim umloi. The information that he had in the past would distract them. Memashalamad b'chutz li'aretz. That which he studied in outside of Israel. Ki kol rav mi Bavel v'chol rebbe me'eretz Yisrael. In the sages, we find that many teachers are called Rav, and many teachers are called Rabbi. What's the difference between the two? Rav is without a Yud, just Reish Beis, and Rebbe is with a Yud. So we say that the teachers that from Israel, they used to refer to as Rabbi. The people from the heads of the yeshiva from Babylonia, they used to call Rav. And the whole difference is just one little point, one little Yud. But that is a world of a difference. So if you're going to learn from a Rebbe, not from a Rav, everything you learned from the Rav is actually going to get in your way. It's like we say a paradigm shift. Sometimes certain things you learn are all within one way of thinking. So it builds. But if you're going to hear something that is in a complete different way of a whole new line of thinking, so to try to grasp this with the basis of understanding of a previous worldview, if you might say, it just will keep the person stuck. And you don't have that openness to receive something totally new. So the same like it is in the physical world, on a levels way beyond that exist in the spiritual realms, where souls need to be dipped in a mikveh of fire to knock out everything that they've experienced of godliness in the lower world, because that's an immature understanding, a very limited understanding, compared to the higher understanding that's happening in a much greater world. The upper Gan Eden and the lower Gan Eden. And even though it seems like, okay, so there's two levels. You can either go to the lower Gan Eden, and then when you're ready, you graduate to the upper Gan Eden. Gan Eden, Elyon v'atachten, avo be'emes, but in truth, yesh riboy revavois madregos. There is myriads upon myriads, which means literally higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. And how far does this go? Ad ein kates. There is no number in terms of experiences for journeys of the soul after it was here in this world, in the afterlife, where souls go on and higher and higher. Yashir. And that's why it says that the righteous people don't have rest, because their journey as they travel goes without an end. So when a person meditates on this idea, that's why this concept is called tavuna. Tavuna means understanding. It's the understanding and the appreciation of the enormous manifestation of life, of experience that is available. Higher and higher and higher, worlds of pleasure, worlds of understanding that are dazzling. And it goes on and on and on and on. So when one contemplates that will create within the person a feeling of what? Of love. Love meaning over here, desire to feel more of that godly light. More of it and more of it. Chenas ben ubas. Will create ben and bas, boy and girl. Boy is love, and girl is fear. Because love is masculine, and awe is feminine. For whatever, like it says in the Torah, it says Isha Yirat Hashem, the woman that fears God. A discussion for another time. But and this is the love and the fear that is created from the tavuna, from the understanding. Sha'ava, where the love is, ka'ava saben ala'av, where the child loves the father. However, this love, nikra nafshi ivisicha balayla. This love is called a love of darkness. If you're loving God in this incredible love, but it's still called immature, dark love. Why? Because the premise of your love is constriction. Is you're not seeing God's face, you're seeing God's back. If you would see God's face, you wouldn't care about his manifestation in all the worlds. You wouldn't want any of his delights, any of his projections, any of his revelations. You would just want him, not anything about him. So when we love his lights, his revelations that fill boundless worlds with infinite ecstasy and bliss, it's still darkness. This verse, there's a verse that says, another verse, it says, my soul longs for you by night. So the Zohar explains, why, and by day the soul doesn't love for God. So the Zohar says that just like a person during the nighttime, when you go to sleep, if you think a little bit, we're taking it all for granted, so we don't think. So we go to sleep, and we know for sure we're like feel positive we're going to wake up. But if a person would know when they go to sleep at night that they're not sure they're waking up in the morning, so when you would go to sleep, you would feel within your heart a like, oh, I really hope I can. I'll have my breath tomorrow morning, right? I'll be breathing. I really want to be alive. We like our soul. We like life. If you ever have a moment that you're not sure, a threatening moment, a person has an asthma attack or something, and they feel like their throat is constricting, and they feel like they can't breathe, so suddenly they become terrified. What's the terror? The terror is I'm losing my soul. I want life. So the Zohar says at night is when you're hoping that in the morning you're going to have your soul back. Okay, you're going to live. So in the same way, the Zohar says, because you are not my soul learns for you, but because you are my soul, God, I realize that you are the life force in my life. I long for you. I long for you because you're my oxygen. You're my life. You're the life of everything. So therefore, I long for you. But that, the Zohar says, is called the love of the nighttime. Why is it? Another reason why it's night. It's night because you can only love God because he is the source of your life when you're not really perceiving his truth. When you're perceiving his truth, the only thing that matters is his truth, not your truth. Suddenly we become utterly insignificant, and the only thing is him. We don't even know that we don't even want to exist in any way other than just his existence. So to love God because his support for us is it's a love that comes as a result of concealment. That's called the love of a child from a father, as we said earlier, because the parent supports me. That's the basis of it. So, like just like a person loves the life of their own soul, is this love, this love for godliness, because God is the fountainhead of life. Mechalkel, he supports, not mechalkel. He feeds, he nurtures. He nurtures and he feeds life with kindness. He gives life to everybody with kindness. But the word, we say this in our prayer, mechalkel, which mechalkel also has the word keli, keli. Keli, keli means 2 times vessel. Mechalkel chayim means that God puts life into vessels. Now, how many vessels are there for God's life? How many vessels are there? Never ending. The higher you go, the closer you are a higher level of energy, a higher experience. The lower you go, one vessel is enclosed in another vessel, and the other vessel is enclosed in another vessel. The more you're coming down into the physical world, the more thick and dense the experience is. The higher you go, the more pure the experience is. Higher, more refined, more elegant. So, Mechalkel Chayim B'Chesed, that Hashem's kindness flows through all the vessels. Keli b'toich keli. But this type of a love, and with all of its value and all of its beauty and all of its greatness, it's still considered only the backside. You followed behind me because you're not seeing my face, you're seeing my back. You're seeing my influence on your world. You're seeing how I influence and create creation, but not who I am beyond creation. Like the expression in Hasidus goes, the primary element of God is not that he is a creator of worlds. The fact that he creates worlds is the least of his accomplishments. It's actually, he needs to infinitely hide himself to even begin to create worlds. So to love him because of that he supports us is loving a small, little, insignificant part of him. The real love comes from a much deeper appreciation. He is reality. He's everything. There's none but him. And therefore, we really, really, really don't like that we don't see that and experience that. We're stuck in the narrowness of our consciousness that keeps us so constricted and limited in the walls of time and space, in the worlds of definitions. And what we really want is just to be one with him. That's called the bride. The bride wants to be one she wants to melt into her husband. That's the idea. So lechtech acharei bamidbar dene yesh panim va'achar. There is face and behind, the face and the back. K'moshe kasav achar v'kedem tzartani. It says, back and front you created me. V'toshes alei kapecha, you put your hands upon me. The tzarech lo have masha kasav v'toshes alei kapecha, you put your hand upon me. What does that mean? V'yuvim bahagdim in panim va'achar. We'll understand it by first understanding face and back. Just like by way of analogy by a person. The face is where the main powers of a person are. Like seeing, shmiya, and hearing. The main features of a person are on their face. We also know it says, that also the wisdom of a person you can see on a person's face. When you look at a person's face, you can see there's a radiant of wisdom, which means much deeper powers is reflected on the person's face. The back of a person, there's not much shown on the person's back. Right? So when we're loving God because of his influence into all the worlds, including all the Gan Edens, including all that ecstasy and bliss, it's only seeing his backside. That's why the love of your youth. Now, as being a daughter, going back, as being a daughter doesn't need to be taught that her father is the one who gives her everything. She naturally knows that. So as a soul, we all naturally know that. And depending on the level of consciousness, the level of our awareness, the level of deeper thought, we can expand that and how much and what we're receiving from God based on that to love him. So those who study Kabbalah and mysticism and get an understanding of higher worlds and what's out there can create even a more desire in their love to know more, to experience more, to have more, even when we're alive in this world. But it's all still considered external. You followed me in the desert. And he says something else. This type of a love, interesting. A love that exists between, there is two types of love. There is cold love and there is hot love. Cold love means it's calm love. And there are certain relationships where that's the appropriate love. And there are relationships where the love needs to be hot. What are they? So the love that there exists between siblings is not supposed to be hot love. You're not supposed to be passionate about your siblings. Siblings is you feel connected to them. They're always there for you. If you need a shoulder to cry upon, they're there. They should be there. There is an innate closeness, and there's no need for passion, fervor, excitement. Even the love between a child and a parent is more of a cold love. I mean, it's nice to visit your mother. It's nice to be next to your father. It's nice to go see them. They're coming. You get excited if you haven't seen them for a while. But it's calm. It's a calm type of a love. Then there is a love between a husband and a wife, between a man and a woman and a husband and a wife. That type of love is passion. It's fire. It's burning. It's madness. That's why we use the term madly in love. So that means it's boiling. So the love with God, it's also that way. When we love God because of all the goodness that he does for us, we feel close to him, and it's more of a calm love. We feel, it's almost like when we pray, we feel like God is cuddling us. He's holding us. We feel his embrace, his closeness, his kindness, that type of a love. But then there is a much deeper love that comes from what? We'll see. That's when we're loving God's backside. It's a cold love. But when we get to glimpse at his face and understand that he's completely otherworldly, he's outside of the context of all existence as we know it, and his existence is the only true existence. And our existence is so relative and temporary. And there's a certain awakening that where a person wants to rip themselves out of limited finite existence and transport themselves into the infinite, into the boundlessness of God. That's a fiery love. Now you say, well, who has that love? Well, where is that? The soul has that capacity. The inside of the soul, it's buried. The love of parent-child is something that, as we said, it's a juice that should be flowing naturally all the time in our souls. Unless, as we say, we convolute it, unless we become desensitized by whatever it is that kind of messes with our natural state, so it becomes abnormal. It's like parents and children should naturally love each other. Do you have relationships that don't work? Do you have parents that are in a fight with their children that hate the parents? You do have that. But that means there's something that needs healing. Something is wrong in the fabric of the natural state of things. Ought to be that they are connected to each other. Yes, sometimes parents can do things to their children that can cause the children to hate them. And whatever reason it is, there can be a divide, but that's already what we might call no. It's an exception to the rule. However, and therefore, the natural state of a neshama is that it loves Hashem because of all the goodness that it feels comes from God. But the face, is this much deeper love, the chuka and a longing, the tainug and a pleasure. But for that, you have to reach inside your own soul and unplug the essence of your own soul. This doesn't come automatically. This is a hidden potential. This we have to dig out. And that's called kedem. And what's kedem? Kedem, because he brought a verse earlier, it said, behind, last and first you created me. Achor v'kedem tzartani. You created me last and you created me first. So it refers to the human being. The human being is both the last creation, because God created everything before the human. In that sense, he created the person last. The human being is also the most needy of all creations. We need everything. So we're the weakest of all creation. On the other hand, we're also the prime creation, the intention of everything. And in certain ways, we can be the leader of the world. So we're higher and lower than everything, before everything and after everything. But the deeper meaning, as he explains over here, these are two levels in the soul. The behind of the soul is our part of our soul that relates and gets excited about the backside of God. In Kabbalah, that's called a bond of back to back. We're attached. It's actually in a relationship, in a marriage, when a couple meet each other, their initial relationship is also back to back. It says Adam and Eve were back to back. It basically means that I love you for what I get from you. And when both of them are loving each other for what they get from each other, that's called back to back. Because I don't love you for who you are. I love you for what I benefit from you. Now, the side of you that benefits me is only your back. Because that's not the main you, what I benefit. That's always the external. The internal is the thing for itself. The external is the thing as it relates to others. So if I'm loving you because of what I get from you, that means I'm loving your back. And if both of them are back to back, that's the relation. Now, a relationship has to start that way. But as you get deeper in each other's life, at a certain point, you recognize you are intrinsically one. And then you love each other not because of what you're getting, and then you turn your relationship face to face. So that's a much deeper love and a much deeper bond. So in our relationship with God, it's also that way. There is the back and there is the kedem. Now, kedem also means east. Yama the kedma. Kedma in Hebrew means east, because east is considered the front of the world. West is considered the back of the world, and east is considered the front. Now, one of the things that happens on the east is that the sun rises on the east. So the east is the first one to receive the light of the sun. That's why the east is called facing the face, because the face of the sun, the sun is coming up. The west side gets to see the back of the sun, so to speak. When the sun is turning its back and it's going down, we get to see the back. The east, you get to see the face of the sun. So the meaning of that spiritually is you want to get to see the face of God, which means to see God not as the beneficiary for the world, but to see God's ultimate truth of who he is and what he is, and to love him for what he is. In the east shines the sun, which is the radiance of the light, which is the revelation of the real will, the desire to cleave and to connect to God, not for any benefit. And this level is called a bride. Lashon kol sanafshi. Now the word kala means yearning, but it has another meaning, expiring. What does it mean to expire? Expire means to become not. When something expires, what does it mean? When you have a candle and it burns until there's nothing to burn anymore, it expired. Expire means when we say, there is a verse that says, Kol san nafshi, King David says, my soul is kol san nafshi, my soul is expiring. So what does that mean? That means I don't want to love you and you support me. I want to expire in you. Because as long as there's still a trace of me, I'm being blocked by the limitations of my definitions. And I want to see you for what you are. For that, I have to let go of myself completely and expire into you. That's the meaning of kala. That's called the completion of the soul. Chuka, and that's the longing. And like it says, to your husband will be your longing. Spiritually, to God, who's our husband. Now, after all of this, he takes it back to the rock. And now we'll understand the difference between tzur and sela. A tzur is a young rock, where there is the potential for a fire, but the fire is still hidden deep inside. A tzur is something, it's like a rock. You can take fire out of a rock, right? You hit it like a flintstone. You hit the rock, you create a spark. So every soul has buried deep inside of it the potential to be a bride to God, to be a kala. But when we haven't brought that out yet, and our spiritual excitement, our motivation, our drive in our Judaism is to serve God because what that does for us, how that will enhance me and my life, that's tzur. That's being a daughter. It's good. God is happy to have wonderful daughters, but that's not what he's seeking. That's not what he's looking for. If you think about it, you can really see, for those who have studied Judaism and the different modes of Judaism, you'll see that Musar and all the ideas that motivate a person to be a good Jew, to learn Torah and 2 mitzvot, until Chassidut, is very much daughter-driven. Do mitzvot so you'll go to heaven. Do the mitzvot so you'll have a good life. Do the mitzvot so that you'll become a good person. Do the mitzvot so that you will fulfill your potential. In every one of these explanations, it's always do something for yourself. How will you do it for yourself? The best thing you can do for yourself is introduce God into your life. So God will be there to support you and to grow you and whatever it is. Hasidism, which is the Mashiach teachings, the Baal Shem Tov lived only 200 years ago. And then Chabad Hasidism, particularly, has a whole different story. If you learn Tanya, you get a whole different understanding of why should you do mitzvah. The focus is not do a mitzvah so that you will have something. The focus is do a mitzvah so you will make for God a home in this world, so that he will be expressed in this world. So he will have what he wants. The language is a very different language. It's a whole different twist. Why? Because Judaism, there is a room for Judaism, what we call Tzur Judaism, and there is Sela Judaism. There is daughter Judaism, and there's bride Judaism. Hasidism is already getting married to God. The focus cannot be on us all the time. We have to move past that. We have to move to a much deeper connection. I'll say this because it's interesting, because tonight is a certain anniversary for me. Because 35 years ago, today was my first exposure to Chabad Hasidism. I was a religious boy and an observant boy and even a Hasidic boy, but I didn't know of Chabad Hasidism. And I went for Shabbat to Kfar Chabad in Israel this weekend. It was Yud Beis Tammuz 35 years ago. In 39, not 30, what is it called? 1989. I just went because a friend dragged me. I was 17 years old. I went to the yeshiva, and I went to Shabbat. And this was perhaps the thing that touched me, that kind of triggered, was I didn't have words to explain it then, but it was exactly this point that kind of turned me into a chassid. Was because I was always fed Judaism that fed the I. Do this because it will enhance you. It'll grow you. You will become more. And when I went there, I heard a different language. And it resonated with me so much deeper than the language of, because everybody's a salesman to sell you what's good for you. And then you have religious salesmen who sell you religion also because it's good for you. But a soul is not really on the deep level. The soul is not looking for what's good for it. The soul wants to serve something bigger than it. And the soul wants to just get out of the way. It just wants to dissolve. It's a much deeper love. So obviously over here he's talking about love and intense love and madness. And obviously that's if you really get into it and you really open it up. But even on a far more surface level, you can the Judaism could be a Judaism where the fuel is a fuel based on the daughter-father relationship, which he doesn't say is anything wrong. It's just external. It's just the earlier stages. But it's not meant to stay over there. It works for, even when the Jews received the Torah, their initial receiving of the Torah was with that mindset. What is the Torah going to do for them? And then they were called Sur, the rock. And when Moshe wants to get water out of them, we'll see why, then you need to hit it. But at the end of the 40 years, they turned into a Selah already, as he's going to explain. Let's see if we can learn another few lines. Getting a little late. What time is it? Oh, I'm teaching already for 2 hours. Okay. V'zeu ha'hefresh, this is between tzur l'sela. Shebchinas tzur, the level of tzur, hu bchinas lechtech acharei b'midbar, you follow after me in the desert. Bchinas binarel beisavia, in your youth of her father's house. Shenikru tzur, they're called tzur tekef achamatan Torah, immediately after the giving of the Torah. Aval b'seif mem shana, but in the end of the 40 years. Shal zen nemar, this is the time when Moshe says to the Jewish people at the end of the 40 years, that until now God did not give you a heart to know him. Ve'inayim liros, and eyes to see. Ve'oznayim lishmoa, and ears to hear. Moses says to the Jewish people, God did not grant you a heart and eyes and ears, a heart to know, eyes to see, and ears to hear until this day. And the sages say, what happened? Why now? Because the sages say that a person does not gain insight into the depth of their teacher until 40 years. You need to study by your teacher 40 years only to begin to get him. I said before, I came 35 years ago, I still have another 5 years to start even beginning to get what the teacher meant. Okay, pretty close. Until this day. Oz nikra sela, then you're called a rock, a soft rock. Shu'ava the b'chinas kala. This is the love of the bride. The inyanu, what does this mean? The hineksiv, v'samticha b'nikras hatzur. God told Moshe, in order to protect him, When Moshe says, I want to see God, Moshe said, I want to see you. Hashem said, I'm going to put you in the hole of the rock. So Sheteva Hatzur, what's the nature of a rock? Of the tzur. Tzur is the hard rock. Kishemakin even al gabe even, when you bang a stone on a stone, yotze mehem eish, fire comes out. Now, before the fire came out, where was the fire? V'nei koydem sheyotze eish, before the fire comes out, hoyu behelim b'nikras hatzur. It's inside the rock, but it's not. You don't get burnt. If you drill a hole in a rock, you stick your finger in, you're not going to get burnt by the fire that's there. It's in a state of potential. It's there, but it's not there. More than that, you can take the rock and put it inside a river for 500 years. And it's not going to extinguish that fire. Because only a expressed fire is extinguished by water. A fire that is in such a hidden state doesn't get extinguished. That was the Rebbe's philosophy. The whole Rebbe's philosophy is that a Jew can be 10 generations not practicing mitzvot. And the Rebbe said, all you need is give him one, not hit him. All you need to ask him, are you Jewish? That's all you need to do. Ask him or her, are you Jewish? And you can bring out that fire. Even if they had every kind of, who knows what, you could have had so much teachers and parents who tried to extinguish any sense of spirituality and godliness out of the child's life. Why? Because this hidden potential fire can't be extinguished. It's part of the essence of every Jew. It's there. Right? You need to bring it out. That's the source of the fire that comes out afterwards. And what does this mean in benefesh adam, in a person's soul? The fire that's in the rock. There's a hidden love. In every Jew there is a love to God. It's hidden. You need to wake it up. To take it out from the concealed to the revealed. Now the question is, how will you get it out? Through talking or through hitting? So it seems like there is a stage where the only thing that will work is striking the rock. There is, however, a stage where the fire is far more on the surface. You know what would be the difference? It doesn't say it here, but I can give you an analogy that perhaps can be the difference. A coal, that you ever make a barbecue and you have a coal and the fire goes into the coal and the fire goes out. You don't cook on coals until the fire is not burning anymore. But the fire is in the inside. How do you get the fire out of the coal? If you want to see the fire, what do? You blow on it. So when you blow on it, you can see it turns red. That white coal, you blow, and if you take a cardboard and you create you can actually get fire literally out from that coal. It gets really red and the fire can come out. Why? Because the fire that's hidden in the coal is not so hidden like the fire that's in a rock. It's more in a state of manifest. So all you need is to blow on it. And it already comes to the surface. But if the fire is in a rock, so you can blow from today to tomorrow. You can go out to any rock, I promise you. And you can blow for years on the rock and there's no fire. But if you know how to strike a rock, you can create a spark and you can get the fire out by striking it. That's because it's in a rock, it's hidden much more and it needs a stronger force to trigger it. I'm not going into the science. This is all just from looking at the concept, not at the science of it. So what he's explaining over here is that When we are still very immature in our soul, in our Judaism, whether it's the people, the collective whole, or a person as an individual, if you want to get the fire out, the love of a daughter and a father, you don't need that. That's easy to get. Everybody, you can convince anybody to do a mitzvah for their own benefit. But if you want to get a deeper connection out of a person, so if the fire is more on the surface, that means the person is already conditioned to reach the selfless love. So then all you need to do is speak to the rock. And we said earlier, Torah study, this is what he's going to explain later. Torah study, because Torah is a download, a godly download, and Torah is not God's backside, Torah is God's face. Torah is God's private, infinite self. It has nothing to do with the world. People think that the Torah is here to tell us how to live our life. Torah is God's wisdom. Torah existed before the worlds were ever created. If there would never be a world, there would still be a Torah. Torah is God's essential inner world. He created a world to match the Torah. So when we study Torah, we're getting a little drip, so to speak, of the face of God, not the back of God. When the face of God enters into, if our fire is closer to the surface, that's enough to bring out the love, the selfless love. But if the soul is not yet ready and the fire is buried like in a hard rock, then you can study Torah with the person. It's not going to trigger this love. For there, you need to already break. You need to break the surface, and that's the hitting of the rock, which we discussed earlier, like the log that needs sometimes to be splintered. So you have to really know where we need to know where we are holding. We also need to know when we are inspiring others where they are holding. In general, right before Mashiach comes, just like the Jews in the end of the 40 years were ready, especially after October 7th, everybody's Judaism is already on the surface. The rocks became coals. Sometimes a person is still a little, but Jews are so sensitive now. So you don't need much to inspire the fire. It's really there. This is where this is going. Wow. Okay, I have a little more clarity than what I had when I started today. It gets a little more complicated, but I think we've broke through. We broke through because he's going to explain Kabbalistically what Sur is, what Sela is, mystically. But we'll leave that for the next class because it'll be too much to pack in today. Okay. Zawza.